Hello and welcome to the June 25th, 2025 meeting of the Needham Finance Committee. It's our final meeting of the fiscal year. And we are operating this in a hybrid format and an hour earlier for those of you who view us more regularly. So is there any citizen requests to address the Finance Committee? Seeing none, I'd like to turn to approval of the minutes of the prior meetings. So we have April 30th.
Yes. And everyone was there, and May 5th.
Okay. Did everybody have an opportunity to read all of those?
I move their acceptance.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. And then we have several reserve fund transfers. So the first one is snow and ice.
That's kind of an interesting day to be talking about. So we just store some of it or something. We buy it back.
Yeah.
Should, just like the old ice houses that you
Right.
saw us. This is the year in showing up of the snow and ice account for the fiscal year. If the budget was set at 433,000 and I'm sorry, the FY 25 budget was set at $441,845. And the number of events, it's hard to believe, but we did have a great number of events during the year. There
Were they ice events or?
mainly ice events or small, under 4 inches of snow, but there were 17 events where salting or plows had to be called out compared to the prior year, which there were only 9.
It was interesting, we were with the schools today, Tina and I, this morning, and we were mentioning, we're doing reserve transfers, and we mentioned snow and ice, and Dave and Dan said, we didn't have one school day today. Were we living in the same town?
Well, because they did such a good job on the roads.
Yeah,
they did
yeah,
last year.
yeah. They had, so 17 events and not one of them led to a school cancellation.
Yeah. It's good.
Oh, Dan is so uber conservative about that anyway.
Yeah.
So, no, I'll never live down the day he did agree to cancel school when there was no.
Right, exactly.
No, we're paying for it now, because we'll never cancel it again.
Yeah. So one question I had is that, well, first of all, when was the last time we didn't need a reserve fund transfer for snow and ice?
Last year.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, but usually we are requiring a reserve fund transfer.
So we always budget at just a minimum amount and then.
We meant that, yes, and then they would be short up by the reserve fund at the end of the year. The reason it's done is the snow and ice account's one of the only ones that is legally allowed to be over expended. And if you're unable to close the budget yet, it's automatically addressed in the following fiscal year. Whereas the deficits are not allowed in any other appropriation line.
mhm.
And the request to shore up is $415,484. Which did come in about 100,000 less than what we were anticipating in the last estimate that I had back in January. What we could have had for a snow and ice event, but it quieted down at the end of February
Mhm.
and nothing really in March.
But there's really nothing that would prevent us from increasing the budget, or we put it in the budget, because it would just close out free cash if we didn't spend it, correct?
That's correct. The only detriment to that is you are required, the town is required to appropriate as much as the prior year was appropriated. If you don't do that, then you're not allowed to deficit spend.
Ah, got it. So
So
you can't go back, once you raise it, you can't go back.
Yes, so
Okay.
we just do a minimal
Okay.
increase to the budget every year. Better flexibility. Yeah.
And is the balance between like contracted services those are I'm assuming those are the non-town plows.
non-town plows.
And employee overtime and reimbursements, is that about where it's always been, or that?
It varies from year to year because it depends when the storm hits. Weekends are more expensive than weeknights. During the working days, snow and ice is not charged at all, because that's not overtime, it's only overtime that can be charged to the snow and ice budget. Because your budget could be for work,
Right,
7 to 3. But it really is, storm dependent the day it happens.
Okay.
We do use town resources first, the contractors are called in when the events get larger.
Just for curiosity, the 17, you probably don't have it, I seem like most of those were either weekends or nights, like very few of those events were during a weekday.
You know, I don't remember, I don't remember on that one. There was a year that we had a consecutive, 2 or 3 years ago, it was like every consecutive, Saturday
Yeah.
for,
Right.
4 or 5 weeks in a row. It was really only, but,
I think there were a lot of,
a lot of early morning
overnight.
events, actually.
Yeah.
Early morning events.
yeah,
I had a couple of questions. One, just a confirmation of what you'd said. Did you say that town employee time spent plowing during regular hours does not go against this budget?
Yes,
Yes.
during the
Right.
workday, because
So,
they.
right, just wanted-
Correct.
But if
We
if
do
there was-
track the expense, but it's not charged.
it's not charged to this, okay. But if it was overwhelming the manpower, then the contractors came in, obviously the contractors would be.
Yeah, contractors.
Right, always budget.
Yes.
My other question was, is there a measurement, I mean, obviously it's weather dependent, but is also, do they have any sort of unit tracking where they can, is it more or less expensive on a unit basis to clear snow from year to year? Like, is that increasing? I would imagine it is increasing because labor costs increase, but is there any tracking of that?
There's, I mean, we do look at what's the cost per inch, we do look at the cost per hour, but they're not really meaningful statistics, because whether it's just an ice event or a 1 inch, you still have the standard out there. So whether it's 4 inches of snow, 6 inches of snow, the standard per hour is about the same.
Right.
So actually, on a per inch basis, it's usually less expensive
Sure.
per inch as you. add a base
Increase,
load.
right? So it really would just be tracking labor cost and.
Which we do track.
Right, and equipment costs
And
on a
fuel
unit
costs.
basis, and when it goes out, as you said, it's a fixed amount really, regardless of inches when it gets deployed.
Correct.
All right, thanks.
It's just more long, duration of the storm.
Right.
Do you have just off the top of your head, like a number of what, like the high point over the last 5 or so years? I know the last few years we haven't had a ton of actual snow, but like what is like a worst case scenario? What this budget looks like?
2015. But yes, one.
That was the-
Yeah, $1.7 million.
Okay, yeah,
So.
that was before I lived here, but I remember that.
100 inches.
There was snow again. Yes, it was. And that were all tough years. And just a couple years later, in 2017 was over
Yeah,
a
it's never
million.
gonna happen.
In 2018.
So this is actually pretty high for relatively low
It's the highest.
snowfall, but maybe amount of.
A number of events is really what
Okay, yeah.
drove this band, inches of snow.
And do we, like, another factor would obviously be our standard of how quickly, how much we wanna expend, use our own employees versus get contractors, like, have we changed our standard? I know Needham generally does a good job clearing things, like, I don't see people complaining that much, but, it seems like we take care of things pretty quickly. Do we, like, try to maintain a
We have.
standard of what we?
We do understand, we don't have what like the town of Dover has, which is called the black pavement standard, meaning that we'll just salt away and make sure that there's no snow on the road. We do allow an inch or two to accumulate. But in terms of the contractors called in, it's really dependent upon the expected duration of the storm and the intensity of the storm. More of the, larger equipment comes from private contractors, because we don't have as much equipment for pushing snow on the, side roads and such. We have enough to maintain the major roads in town, but if it's a heavy snow, we're needing to rely upon the contractors to clear the side streets and the non, arterials.
And we use a like slurry as opposed to chemicals, right? Which is somewhat pet safe or. I only asked that because I tried to buy the pet safe stuff and someone said the town of Dedham just changed their regulations, so it was all sold out.
And it's a slurry, it's less harsh on the environment, but the better benefit from it is the pre-treatment. It lasts longer, so it takes just that much longer for the snow and ice to accumulate on the road. But you have to get it out there before the temperatures drop below a certain amount. Do you recall what that was?
I don't remember what it was, but I know one of the things that also leads to the higher cost is when you do the brine. And then it drops below, and then the temperature raises just a little bit and it's now raining, all that brine just washed away.
Mm.
So it's like, when that was this past year, there was a lot
A
of
lot of that.
dipping like right around that freezing point, and that causes, is more expensive.
What?
Just seems like it's easy,
Yeah.
yeah, that's. It should be an easier storm to deal with.
So I would make a motion that we approve the reserve fund transfer. In the amount of $415,484, cover the snow and ice deficit. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Not lastly, excuse me, third reserve fund transfer is legal services.
Yes, and you want to talk about it?
Evening.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for having me here today to chat briefly about the legal services reserve fund transfer request for the amount of $5,000. This line for context for the last few years has been level funded. We came back 2 years ago with a reserve fund transfer request at the end of the year as well. So you're all aware, we do not know going in what new litigation the town may face throughout the year. Some years we are lucky to not have additional new litigation or very little of it, and sometimes we do. This year we did. As we came down to the wire on this right now, we are likely facing a deficit of anywhere from we're going to squeak right under, or we could get up to about $5,000 conservatively above the $329,000 appropriated. We're still waiting on the final final invoices from our attorneys who worked through us through the end of the year. And this request would cover what we believe would be a conservative estimate on the high end. So not too much, but we want to be sure.
Will they get their invoices in before the end of the fiscal year?
They will get them in usually on June 30th, especially for town council itself, Harrington Heat, our town council. We've got them, we've got McGregor, which does our MDL work, which has yet to invoice us. We're conservatively estimating they've got about 1,000 left, and labor law, Miracle O'Connell has yet to invoice us as well. They've got some last ongoing work that they're finishing up right now and asking some of their attorneys to please submit their hours as we need them.
So
Any other-
two questions. One is, of the stuff that's going on, is there any reason to be concerned for next year's budget that there's either new or more intensive litigation that could present a problem in FY 26?
There's nothing extraordinary before council right now. It's standard caseload and such. We had a couple of little exceptional cases during this past fiscal year that arise. But right now, there's nothing that arises to the level of concern.
You know, are you able to pay Dave from next year's, from FY 26 budget? legal invoices that were incurred in FY 25.
No, and hence why we need to do the reserve fund transfer. It's more precautionary than an expectation.
Okay. Has there been any discussion about the one of the housing authority ones that they presented to T-Chalk, or I'm not pronouncing the acronym correctly?
Actually,
Yeah.
actually, you are.
Okay. And, town council said that and I agree with his opinion that it doesn't belong within what the town meeting appropriation was, or what types of, things would be supported through the town meeting appropriation. So I think there's still some bills there that are FY 25 bills that I think have been paid by the housing authority, but
Would have to be paid for that.
so there's so as long as it's been paid by the housing authority, someone's paid. The question of reimbursement will then continue, and it doesn't get reimbursed from this, so that there's, okay.
Yep.
That's all I had.
Any other questions? Something like that.
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the reserve fund transfer of $5,000 for legal expenses.
Second.
All in favor? Great. And finally,
Where's our town clerk?
Representative. Yes.
Is she?
Yes.
Wow,
she's in the dance competition.
in Sicily.
Yes.
Wow.
Beats Mosley down in Charles.
Come on.
Where it all started.
Exactly.
So, this is a reserve fund, transfer for, town clerk. What drove the need for this is, and there was an earlier reserve fund transfer for the same purposes. And that's just the extra demands and expenses incurred by the department. First, as a result of early voting and participation in the early voting was much higher. And early voting meaning having ballots mailed to you and then having to, provide the prepaid envelopes of, if you mail them back.
So it's early mailing.
Well, that part one, part two is the early voting that they can come to town hall and have extra staff available to process those, to check people in and let them vote. On the salary side, we are okay. It's all the expenses that still, and again, most importantly, the actual balance is where the large expense was. Now, we do get reimbursed for some of those costs, which town clerk did file with the state. And when we do receive that reimbursement, that'll go right to free cash.
Okay, what do you anticipate that reimbursement will be? Is
It's
it,
in the 40 to 50% range. They don't reimburse dollar for dollar.
So is this something we should,
And I'm sorry, the other reason, of course, was special election, which wasn't budgeted at all.
yeah, so aside from that being kind of a one-time event. In our budgeting, should we be counting on the in-person early voting and mail ballots in these budget figures going forward? It seems like that's a very common thing, it's only been.
Yeah, and this, Miller, that's what she's thinking. She did, her expenses in her budget submission for 26. In anticipation that, there'll be, one that will have the early voting even for town elections. And, and that it's gonna just be ongoing.
Yeah.
So.
I would make a motion that, we approve the reserve fund transfer request, in the amount of $11,548, to the office of the town clerk. The reasons set forth in the, description.
Second that.
all in favor? And then, reserve fund transfer from the
Finance
finance.
department, and that's, this is the last one. It's, similar, circumstances as the town clerk that, we received their reserve fund transfer from the finance committee back in September for costs that were associated with the 5-year recertification process that the town is obligated to do. And, those costs, were, all said and done, requires another $7,068 to get us through. And basically what was happening is other divisions were offsetting the increased cost that we were realizing in the assessing division, but some of the costs we can't avoid and they too were higher. For instance, ambulance billing, the contact for the collection services is on a percentage basis. And ambulance billing is up, so the good thing is we have more revenue, but the expenses have to be budgeted, and that's my budget, but the costs came in above. We have a budget $35,500 for this, and we're probably looking at about a payout of $40,000 for the year. That's the estimate for the final week, so for June.
Your budget has ambulance billing?
Yes. Most collection costs are carried by the finance, because it's the treasurer collector's office that in the end is responsible for collections.
And it mentions here that there incurred costs associated with the commercial taxpayer dispute resolution. Is that?
That's part of the whole abatement process, but in particular, some of the commercial cases that were lingering from we had 21, 22, 23, where we didn't have a director of assessing. I had to pinch hit. That's not an area I'm strong on. And so relied upon services from outside sources, including the long retired director of assessing that helped us settle up some of the larger commercial accounts. I did have to, in my first ever attempt, I had to go before the ATV though and defend the case. He won.
All right.
Football your head, right? You're undefeated.
You did, so.
All right, I'll make a
Any other-
motion to approve the reserve fund transfer of $7,068 from finance department.
I'll second.
All in favor?
And Madam Chair, forms will come to you via DocuSign.
Okay.
Dave, I think I asked a question and you were kind enough to get the answer back to Molly, so. Us having approved these 4 reserve fund transfers.
Yep.
The balance that will be left in the reserve fund for FY25, that'll then get kicked over to free cash is 1,341,000.
And then head that off. Yeah.
So that's FY 25's ending balance.
That's ending balance, correct? in the reserve fund.
Which is slightly higher than last year's ending balance.
Or was it?
Last year had 1,150,000. Instead of the same budget last year as you did this year.
Okay, and then I'll just turn to the election of officers for fiscal year 2026. I may not be doing this correctly, but I.
Sure you wanna leave? Sure you wanna step down?
Vietnam is calling.
This now for a year and a half, let's not forget, so it's enough. I would like to elect as offer for your vote, John Conley as vice chair to become the chair next year. And his vice chair, Barry Kaufman. So.
What do we?
Is that a nomination?
Yeah, it's a nomination, not an election.
Nomination, and I'd like to just take a vote,
Unless people wanna discuss.
unless you want to discuss, or, but I did ask everybody, let everybody know. You want to vie for these positions next year, you know, there's like,
Why not?
but it's great, so,
Everybody will get their turn.
If it requires a second, I would second.
great. All in favor of that slate? Aye.
Saying this.
With Barry.
Okay, congratulations to John Barry. And
we'll speak of your tenure tonight, okay?
Yeah.
We won't do that here.
And yeah, I guess we could have gone earlier. Ooh, let's still go early, but, any
There
other,
is a bar there.
there is a bar, any other updates, outstanding issues?
I have two. Let's start with Tina and I were this morning with the school department. Going over what they're projecting for how they're closing out the year and what their potential turnback is. And we sort of go through it every year at this time where they have most things in, but not everything in. And it looks like the turnback is $2.1 million. I'm just gonna use a round number. Most of it is through savings achieved either on salary wise or through non-filling positions for a full period of the year. The combination of those two, and then a couple of small things adds up to the 2.1 million. On the revenue side, they, projected their grants came in as projected and everything came in as projected, so they were good on the revenue side and, didn't have any, deficits there, but achieved some savings. And so it's within about 2% of the overall, their overall budget, which is the sort of the target of that we seek. And their proposal is to essentially, I'll just use the term sort of retain 1.6 million of it for volatility and special education and the potential of some grants that have been relying on, federal and state grants, in that area, possibly not coming through in full. So reserving 1.6 for that possibility. And then, turning back to the town and to go into free cash, $500,000.
So remember how that works again?
Yeah.
How they can.
Well, so it's really convoluted. Tina had a taste of it today. It's a circuit breaker funds. You can
Right.
carry over circuit
That's
breaker
right.
funds. You can't carry over anything else. So that's what's potentially is, that's what's being carried over. So it's not like the tax revenue is not being carried over,
Right.
but the circuit breaker money. And sort of basically, another term, it's sort of being used as a contingency. If that circuit breaker is less than projected for next year, it would be available if needed to go against some of the expenses on that side.
And just, are they prepaying anything? Like historically, they prepaid.
No,
tuition.
nothing's being prepaid, and there was no request for some of the 500 going to
Yeah,
things or.
Right.
And why
in
is-
the budget.
why is that?
Well, I think, one of the things we finished with was, the passage of the new, collective bargaining agreement. And it'll fit within the FY 26 budget, but there's gonna be pushes in FY 27 to 28, and I think they're, on the salary side that they're gonna have to be sensitive to, and so they're gonna have to, they're looking judiciously at expense items that they might forego or postpone, and so instead of undertaking some of those expenses, they're turning money back. Which we applaud them for. And so I thought that was good. And the other thing to take away, I think they funded, was it 37? How many positions was it, did the early retirement? I think it was 37, was that the number they did?
Bigger than what they, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, 17.
17.
It was 17, equating to like $375,000 was what and that's all been funded through. I'm sorry, it was 17 was the number. It took the early retirement.
And that's already been funded.
Sorry.
Can they use any of this 1.6 toward programs that they cut?
No.
When they were doing the budgeting process?
Has to, would be strictly as earmarked towards volatility and not getting all the funds on, for special education.
Is that typical that they do this kind of carryover?
Yeah.
Usually allowing a carryover and then they end up.
So it's,
spending it or-
right, I mean, we always have the debate
Yeah.
with them about it and sort of, is there a point in time where your concerns about next year really aren't?
They
not
just
to say
like to have that
But
cushion.
realize it.
Well, they also tried to up, tried to have that, create a revolving, not a
It
revolving.
was a revolving fund, it was a,
Right,
yeah,
to address, to partly address, to give them more flexibility, I guess, or more.
except
Yeah,
this
so the
is-
concern is not so much,
What?
This is.
Yeah, exactly.
the concern is not so much that they don't, they're getting, higher expenses per se, it's just the concern about on the revenue side, what they're relying on for circuit breaker and other grants
Yeah.
for those potentially being diminished. And
Did they
that's what the
suggest
concern
like
is.
that there's specific grants of X, Y, and Z
Yeah,
that
they
are
have-
at risk?
there's-
They must have had
Yeah,
it.
there's a,
Yeah.
the IDEA program, is the one in particular, which.
These are all state.
Federal specialty.
That's a-
Yeah,
that's a
individual-
federal-
It's a federal program, but then it passes down through the state,
Yeah.
and comes through circuit breaker. And IDEA stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The other acronym they use is ESSA, which is Every Student Succeeds Act, and those are two where funding is relied upon, but they're fearful of some of that being cut back.
Don't we typically only get like, it's like under 2 million in federal circuit breaker funds for Needham anyways?
Well, I
We
think,
get a lot of state.
yeah,
we get
but some
some
of the
state-
state money comes from the
Comes from
federal,
the
so,
federal,
Yeah.
but you're right about that, So it was, so that was our meeting today. I don't know if anything more you wanna add on that. And then the other thing I just have to report on is on the quiet zone, and that's been very quiet. There's really been no activity and no projected activity in the short term. There's a lot of reliance and waiting for the MBTA and Keolis to kind of step up and do the things we need from them, such as engage in a plan and approving a plan and things along those lines. And it's been crickets, just using that phrase from them with no real projection as to when they said they're gonna get back. So there hasn't been that. They sent out a report, that's what I'm sort of parroting here, but there was no meeting because there was nothing to meet about this spring. So I don't think you're gonna see anything
in
on
October.
that, on definitely not in October. It would be the earliest would be next May.
Wow, that's really been dragging along.
It seems to me that there's no interest on.
They
the
don't want to
deal.
do it.
Right, exactly, so.
I did get to witness in Switzerland, it was, I think I sent you a
Yeah.
picture of the
But they were
gates.
pretty economical, like those
Right.
didn't look that substantial.
No, but they were just, they were the type of gates that we would need, I don't know, and again, it behooves me why it would be so expensive. They were very effective and.
Yeah, on a related note, and I was driving through Waltham by the Brandeis.
Oh, yeah,
I don't know if you ever, trains go by there all the time. I've never, their crossings look just like our crossings. I've
And they're
never,
grade level.
in a grade level, I've never heard a horn.
huh,
I mean, I've probably done it 10 times in the last,
but are they the
2
same
months.
gates that
they
we?
look exactly like ours. So I don't know what the difference is. I'm sure there is a difference.
I can
in
show you
probably
this
the region,
picture, I mean, but.
But it's interesting that they just, I don't hear any of
Well, do they
that.
have a quiet zone?
I don't hear any of it
Do they?
you have, but,
No, but you need a certain type of gate that, I mean, to literally prevent anybody from
Yeah.
cutting in between.
And then there's all kinds of logistics, when you look at each of the intersections at West Street and at May Street and Great Plain and then Oak and, there's all like private land, there's MBTA land, the town land, and this equipment's all gonna take up more space than it presently does. And so
Yeah, so you
you
gotta
need
get,
to get easements and you need to get all the land investigation, so it's a lot more complicated than I think
Yeah.
anyone ever thought it was gonna be.
And it's the pedestrian areas
Right.
too, and I remember they were
Yes.
talking about like gates that you had to.
Like you basically.
Like, you travel, like,
I mean,
It's like, that doesn't make a lot.
So the takeaway is it's quiet. I don't think you're gonna say anything in the short term on that. That's what I have.
Okay, anything on the large housing? There was-
Yeah, so we had a public hearing a couple weeks ago that, I don't know, there were about 40 people or so that turned out. We worked in small groups just to see what people were thinking about that. We have another public hearing scheduled for later in this fall, hoping to get something to the planning board, September, October-ish, and then town meeting next May. It's gonna be hard. I know. there are too many variables and too many different agendas. And it's a very large committee.
Are they working on fiscal impact?
Yes,
Okay.
but everybody it's a very nebulous concept. So it's not gonna be easy.
By the time they come up with something, you know, all these houses will have.
Yeah,
I feel like the market's already.
Yeah,
doing
it's
tariffs.
changing.
It's beyond this
Yeah.
point.
It's definitely been a change in sort of design style though. Whether you like it or not, there's definitely, there's some.
It has nothing to do with that.
I know it
house
doesn't, but it
study,
just
right?
is-
That-
Well, I think they're talking about it though,
Well, so-
the design.
well,
I
that's the
don't know
other
that
thing,
they
it's like,
can
we can't
for it.
control that,
Yeah.
and
Right.
that's part of the conversation, and we can't. We can't tell people,
It's not architecture.
you can't tell people, you can't mandate what a house looks like.
Like
Sounds
Still
too,
has a
right,
lot
but like,
more, is a
yeah.
lot stricter zoning for all elements. So, and is there anything on the vision?
You're committed.
Their meeting tonight, today. I chose this meeting instead.
So there'll only be 27 members there?
And the committee is just growing and growing. The interesting point about the agenda for today's meeting was that they were deliberately not inviting the outside consultant. And the thrust of the meeting was supposed to be for the committee to figure out now with the latest guidance they've received from the select board, a path forward.
What's happening with the grant?
Nothing. They haven't,
Decided whether or not they were gonna pursue the grant with the bike lane?
well, all of that stuff has been deferred. to
Deferred,
tomorrow.
yes, the last select board, but they said, let's not do anything
But
to it,
in the deferral,
keep it for
what
now.
is?
Well, there is, of course, the leadership of the committee is full steam ahead. So, don't think for a minute that has changed a lot of the opinions of the early people on the committee. It'll be interesting to see what the new dynamics are. We had a meeting a month or so ago, and some of the business reps were there. They just flat out said, we don't want this. So don't. So, it's gonna be interesting to watch.
From what I saw in the select board took it up, I think, and
Yeah.
said that they would like to see different options.
Okay.
So like a
3 options. of-
4 lane or whatever we have, and then maybe a 3 lane and then a 2 lane. So at least we can see some different.
Yeah, up to that,
You know.
the only option was
Yeah.
the same option every
Right,
time,
right.
which was the one that was being put forward by the consultant. Anecdotally, I thought it was interesting because in the materials that the consultant has been citing about the positive elements of all this, they hold out Central Street and West Roxbury.
Mhm.
And earlier this week,
Right.
one of the mayoral candidates has promised the West Roxbury people that if he's successful, he will take out the
Yes.
bike lane
Sure.
and Central Street at West Roxbury.
Hmm.
There you go.
All right, related question, is there part of a biking? Is there a sort of townwide biking strategy that goes into those discussions? And I asked, just again, this was Dedham Ave the other day, where they have a bike lane on just one lane, one side of the road, but none on the other side of the road. Like, are there? Just as in
Nothing
that,
formal.
in
This
that
is
committee.
probably the most formal
Okay,
it's ever gotten in town.
There is a mobility committee though, that I believe
Yeah.
is studying a townwide bike network. I don't know any of the details, but I do know that there are people who are thinking about it and how this interconnects with it. That's all. in detail.
So that's it.
Okay.
I had a couple of quick questions on school related topics. One, and I probably should know the answer to this, I'm sorry, I don't. The school budget, the education budget of, we're just looking at the audit of the 154 million. Are there any infrastructure costs on that, or is that all operations?
That's all all operation that's budgeted with them with the inclusion of the Commonwealth's contribution to the teachers' retirement system for the Needham teachers. The town, the school system, the town do not pay towards the pension costs for teachers, only for the non-teachers in the school system. There are other costs that are actually carried within the town budget, such as the health insurance, the cleaning of the buildings, maintenance of the buildings, powering the buildings.
So none of that's in the education.
Right, insuring the
line
buildings,
item.
right,
Yeah.
all the buildings really are not within the school, it's basically, I think it's people,
It's just,
it's really what.
People
okay,
contracted services for school transportation, school lunch, the special education.
and then the note, Molly, that you forwarded on the July 9 meeting for Pollard, is that just a public?
Mhm.
Anybody can come and hear what
Yes,
have to be said,
So I think,
so.
the listening session.
you know, what I heard on that was one of the things that attracted the group to selecting this architect firm, HMFA, who was their track record of engaging with communities and listening to communities and dialoguing with communities. And I think this is it is along those lines. So it's for them to hear people. So I think that's what it's about.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did read it may have been in the Needham Observer, which was a quote, may have been taken out of context, but I think it was from the design firm. When I think the question came up about cost, and the response was, we don't look at cost right now. We're just really looking at what people want. To basically to that extent, and then following that, we'll come back, I'm assuming, and that the rest of the quote wasn't there, but I'm assuming the rest of that was. Then we will talk about budget, and I don't know if that's. The position of the school committee, or the
I
school,
think that's the way the MSBA works. First, you look at your educational program and what's necessary. Then you start to build out what's necessary to accomplish that. Then that's it, then they start looking at the cost. The MSBA is interested in having the lower cost options that they identified, but it needs to meet whatever the educational program that the school committee and the MSBA was receptive to supporting.
and is there a minimum? Like you meet the need, right? So is it meet the need and then various
Right.
levels of must have, nice to have, great to have, top of the line,
Newton North.
whatever. So is there actually a,
Well, there's
So the-
the education requirements need them, of course, many communities in this area do provide more educational opportunities and curriculum that exceeds what the state requires.
I think
So
that-
the community does have a lot of weight in terms of what that program will be.
I think the simplest example of it is the MSBA for middle schools does not pay for a separate auditorium. They, as part of their program for middle school, they'll have a combined cafeteria. And that's what they would pay for here at Pollard now. A lot of people, and I will see that people want to have an auditorium,
Sure.
and so that we would be on our own for that cost, if that's what, you know, collectively, people decided that's what they wanted to have up at Pollard. I think one of the other things to look at is whether Pollard should be at 3 grades or 2 grades.
Right.
Because potentially that having as 3 grades is gonna add a substantial cost to the building.
sure,
So I think, you know, those are the things that are gonna get flushed out over the next 6 to 9 months and part of the discussion. Whether it's on July 9th or at other times, so we'll be along about things like that.
okay. And as part of that, do they do any sort of, when they come up with the bids or the options? Right, do they do any sort of side by side, just take me an example, like looking at the cost of, I know Sunita Williams is an elementary, but. Sunita Williams, whatever it was 6 years ago, 50 million. You know,
The MSBA has their formulas, what they think per square foot cost is for each level of education. So in the MSBA, that's how they work in terms of determining the budget, or certainly determining the.
So they have to work up their budgets really according to the MSBA.
Yes.
formula.
Oh,
At least-
understood that if they exceed it, it's all.
Sure.
all-
MSBA.
But in terms of the
Reimburse.
line items and how they present the data,
They
they
all come
wanted
through
to
there.
go through.
Yeah.
I think one of the risks though is that even the per square foot assumption in our 311 million number is lower than current MSBA projects, kind of comparable projects in the pipeline. So the issue is, can we even realize the 311 million, or is it 311 million plus?
And Dave, last time, I think it was last meeting, maybe it was the meeting before, but I thought we talked about, or maybe not, let me just ask the question. What, is there a budget number that would not require an override vote?
Oh, no.
There's no budget number that would,
Yeah, we 20, I'm gonna take $20 million.
okay.
Yeah,
The auditorium and nothing else.
Yeah, not
that
even.
pretty much would be it, yeah.
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 There isn't
Yeah.
a physical building that above 20 million that we could do, I think, without an override, and rough.
A townwide override vote.
Yes, correct.
And from what I understand from the process too, so we should see in the fall at some point, the different scenarios, like the 7-8, 6-7-8. What it looks like at DeFazio, what it looks like on site, what a renovation addition looks like versus a new construction. And cost estimates related to each of those scenarios. My question is, when do, like, are they gonna ever talk to the finance committee
That
about
was my
that?
next
Do
question.
we, yeah,
Yes,
when we get
How do
those
we
scenarios,
influence?
do we consult, like, do we get an opinion, or should we be going to a public meeting and saying, we like this, we don't like this?
So there's a lot in that,
Yeah,
because they have a lot on their plate. I mean, the timeline they're trying to follow
it's tight,
is really, really tight. I mean, they're already several months behind, just not because anyone did anything wrong, but just by doing the designer selection, they're already behind.
right?
And they're basically saying the designer's gonna have the feasibility study done by
Right,
Christmas
October.
time, or
Or earlier.
or something like that. It just seems impossible to be able to do that, and
But they kind of settled, I mean, they went through this process in the master plan, they was settled on a 6-7-8 school.
But that's our master plan. The
Right.
MSBA still has to
Right.
come
Yeah.
in and evaluate several other plans in above and beyond kind of what's in our school master.
And that also was,
I
really-
believe.
enrollment trajectory was.
Yeah.
much higher than.
Was
it is.
different
Yeah.
than what we're looking at right now, so they needed.
But also, you gotta remember that master plan was never voted on.
Right.
It's not a voted, it's a plan, but it's not something that the town voted on, or the finance committee voted on, or the select board
But for
voted.
something that would go for an override, I don't think so, but I guess we do vote on it
Yeah.
as a committee. But-
So I think a lot of it, I think is, I mean, so I'm planning on going to the 9th and
Yeah.
try to go to as many of the ones that. I'm gonna try to go to as many PVBC meetings as I can to just to try to get a feel of where things are and be able to report back to this group on it. And I expect that they're gonna say these are the things we have, you know, kind of like, let's get people's feedback on it. But I haven't seen that they've set that for October 4th or something along those lines.
Right. So we won't take a vote and anything like that, cause there's no town meeting.
And I think we can
Approval.
express
I think
opinions.
we need to express our opinions and highlight the risks of a success, you know. An override of this magnitude isn't a slam dunk.
Right.
And so I think,
Well, I think there's a major concern that the town is not going to approve override.
That's a risk.
yeah,
And I think that's, you know, one of the things when you look at, you know, the 300 numbers baked in.
Right.
People are kind of prepared for that. If it comes at 4, I mean, that's because that's a different, very
Right.
different animal, right? And I think, so there's a lot of unknowns. I think we have to let the process, you know, get going. This architect, by all accounts, is great. And let's kind of see how they do. And,
The town meeting ultimately will have to approve going forward with an override.
Right, and that would
Yeah.
be, that, the schedule for that is scheduled for, October of 26.
That the town meeting would
Town
vote to
meeting,
put it on the
that-
ballot.
right.
for November.
For November, right? No, that, they would, town meeting would vote, and then the ballot question would be in November.
And just clear, quick, town meeting has no say if it's a ballot question, only the select board decides whether there's a ballot question or not. Town meeting decides whether it's gonna appropriate the money to do the project. Once it's.
Got it. So town meeting has to vote to appropriate it, but then it still has to go to the,
Of
To the
course, or to go to the voters before town meeting, just that the scheduling that they're looking at right now. The project would be voted upon by town meeting in October of 26, and then the ballot question will be the November state election.
got it.
However, the select board, in order to have that, the select board actually have to submit the ballot question to
Before.
the Secretary of State by the first Wednesday in August. If they don't do that, then that, or Mr. Conley was saying about that tight time frame, because they gotta have a sense of what the number is by August in order to submit a ballot question.
Interesting. So in terms of our logistical process, the only thing that we're actually opining or voting on would be to recommend that town meeting appropriate the money that has already been potentially put on a ballot before we even vote on it. Got it.
So that makes a lot of sense, right?
Right.
And that's,
So
that's very
basically
agree to your point, like, how do we,
Yeah.
is there a process to influence that so that it's not? The discussion is it 311 or 450?
Right.
It's. Is there a $200 million option, hypothetically? May not look great, maybe it's, white paint and not a great auditorium, or whatever that is, but is there a $200 million, just hypothetically, option? And what are the things that you don't get with it?
Well, it's like
Right.
any other warrant question that
Right.
comes before us, right? To the extent
But if
we
you-
can influence,
But if you only see,
correct.
the decisions have already been made, that it's already gonna be 300 plus.
So what I sort of had in my head is when the feasibility study is complete, that we request a meeting to go through it and be able to provide our feedback, for whatever they want it for, but I,
We
but I
may need
think that,
adjusting his models. if that,
right.
Well, once they get close to what an actual numbers,
Yeah.
all we've been working with is what the submitted estimate was
Mhm.
from the school.
But I think that's a real risk that the number is higher.
I think you can probably bet on it.
Okay, thank you.
A good recession might help.
All right, I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Right.
And we'll see you at comments.